Imposter syndrome is a myth. Technically, it's a real thing, like it exists in the world, but it's a myth that you have to let it define you. That's what I meant. Now, I think this is something that most people struggle with, and it's pretty easy to see why. Most people get caught up in the comparison trap, which causes us to doubt ourselves and what we're actually capable of. Now, I've dealt with this throughout most of my life, so I figured I'd walk you through a few stories, situations, and touch points to help illustrate why I felt like an imposter, and more importantly, what I did about it to help me to get through it. Now, let's get into this. So real quick, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick, and I have had a non-linear path to get to where I am today. After college, I worked as a full-time mechanical engineer, a project manager, and a part-time military officer. Now fast forward to today, and I no longer work as a mechanical engineer or project manager. Instead, I turned my part-time military service into my full-time primary source of income. Now during every step of my journey, from engineer to military officer to part-time YouTuber, I guess, I've had to deal with feeling like an imposter. So let's start at the beginning with my civilian career. Now almost immediately from the moment I started my career as a mechanical engineer, I felt like an imposter. My time in college did not do much in the way of building up my confidence and preparing me to perform as an engineer. My entire time at college was an absolute struggle. I basically failed my way from one area of concentration to another. I started off as a biology major with aspirations to do something in the medical field. Well, that didn't work out, so I switched to chemical engineering. Again, that didn't work out. So then I switched to mechanical engineering. Even with the switch to mechanical engineering, I still struggled to maintain passing grades. The advanced math and engineering theory was really difficult for me to wrap my head around, and don't even get me started on electrical circuit theory. Any confidence I had left was ground into dust after I scraped my way through that class for the second time. I graduated with a 2.56 GPA, and as you could imagine, finding someone who would hire me with scores like that was a challenge. But eventually, I did find someone who was willing to give me a chance as a mechanical engineer. But even so, I got that first job and I still didn't feel like I belonged there. Nothing had changed. I didn't feel like I deserved the title of engineer, and maybe I didn't. You know, when most people think of an engineer, what are some of the stereotypes that pop in your head? They're probably mathematically gifted and capable of making sense of large numerical calculations in their head. You know, they can make sense of complex concepts with dozens of variables, and of course, they have to be behind a computer with a couple of 3D renderings showing all the possible ways their design could fail without doing thousands of additional calculations. Now, as you can imagine, I didn't fit that image at all. To this day, I still struggle with doing basic math in my head, and don't bother asking me to design you something in some kind of 3D modeling software. That's just not me. So at this point, you're probably wondering to yourself, okay, so he couldn't do the bare minimum required to be an engineer, so clearly he was fired, right? That's a fair assessment, but that's not what happened. This career was one of the first instances where I started using the concept of how can I? I'd come to the realization that I couldn't be an engineer for this company in the traditional sense. My peers all had their strengths, so I had to find mine. I had to figure out how I could accomplish the same results as the other engineers in the company, but do it in a way that made sense to me. Now, eventually I found my advantage by getting hyper focused on what really mattered to our clients. What I realized was that I didn't have to know how to manually calculate for every single possibility, because many things we interact with, to include engineering, are standardized. It only makes sense for industries to standardize materials and calculations because it streamlines everything and it makes it cheaper and safer. Once I figured out the how, I could then dig deeper into the why behind the decisions I was making. It did not matter that I wasn't capable of the same level of calculations as my peers, because I was getting the same results in half the time at a quarter of the cost. I had a very successful career as an engineer, and eventually I moved into project management. I guess it would be a little more accurate to say that I was forced into project management, depending on how you look at it, but that's a story for another day. The point is, while I initially felt like an imposter because I didn't conduct my job in the traditional sense, I still performed in a way that was well within the governing regulations, using credible resources approved for use at all levels of my industry. What I learned is that in the real world, supervisors and clients don't care about the intricate details of how you accomplish the thing. They only want and need just enough supporting data to verify if what you're presenting to them is verifiably true or false. Now, moving on into the second chapter of my life surrounding imposter syndrome, this is going to encompass my time in the military. Now, throughout my entire career as a mechanical engineer, I had a second career as a part-time military engineering officer in the United States Army National Guard. Now, for those of you who don't know what this means, it basically means that once a month and a couple weeks during the summer, I would go to whatever unit I happened to be attached to at the time, and we would train on military tactics, weapons training, and do paperwork. A lot of paperwork. Military loves its paperwork. I won't bore you with the entire journey to becoming a military officer, but it's quite the same story as how college was for me. That is to say, it was a struggle. I joined the military straight out of college, so I hadn't grown as a person yet. Basic training was a struggle, and officer candidate school, that was even worse. During officer candidate school, I failed numerous events and scored near the bottom of most practical exercises. In hindsight, knowing what I know now, I probably shouldn't have been there. That school wasn't designed to convert soldiers like me. It was designed for soldiers that had several years of prior experience into officers. It wasn't designed for people like me who had a total of 9 weeks of basic training experience. But I did make it through, and I made it to my first unit assignment. And just like my civilian career, I was lost and couldn't make sense of this new world. The language was new and it was foreign. I had a lot of ground to cover and not enough time to figure it out. We only trained together on a part-time basis, which isn't enough time to figure out things on your own, let alone enough time to test out those new things and verify that they worked or if they didn't. The learning curve was extremely steep, as you'd imagine, and I really didn't feel like I belonged there. I had the rank, which symbolized my position and the responsibility that I held, but I didn't feel like I was worthy of it. This one honestly took me a few years to get over, and that's okay. I feel like anytime you see a video or read an article about getting over imposter syndrome, the illusion is given to us where it's watch this or read this to get over your insecurities fast. The world does not work that quickly, especially when it comes to the human mind. Learning to control your thoughts and emotions, it's similar to exercise. If you've never done any serious deep muscle exercises, initially it's gonna be this massive challenge. It's hard, the weight feels impossibly heavy, you're sore the next day, and it's even worse the second day. And honestly, like mentally, you just want to give up and quit. This is why it is such bad advice to just go into the gym and start banging out as much weight as you can, as hard as you can, as fast as you can, for as long as you can. You're going to hurt yourself, not just physically, but also mentally as well. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you can only do the new thing once and then you never return to it again. So keeping all this in mind with regards to getting over the feeling of imposter syndrome, I slowly tried to improve something about myself every day that I was in uniform. Now, I didn't have to be anything huge. Most days they were just really tiny things, but those tiny things, they add up over days, weeks, months, and years. At the time, it really didn't feel like I was making any progress at all. I still felt like I was pretending to be a military officer and that I didn't belong. Now, this is where having a little perspective comes in. When you spend your time in a bubble comparing yourself to others, you don't get a sense of where you actually stand. Over the years, the more time I spent around my peers in uniform, the more I realized that I actually knew and sometimes could do more than I gave myself credit for. I'd spent years silently grinding away at my craft and learning how to better myself as a military officer instead of putting myself out there and forcing my opinions on others. This was a great lesson in understanding where I stood. I thought that by being quiet in the background meant that I was an imposter pretending to play Army. Really, in reality, sometimes those of us around us who speak the loudest, they are actually the ones pretending to sound like they know what they're talking about. Okay, so let's recap. So far, we've discussed how I overcame my feelings of imposter syndrome, both in military and my civilian career. But what about the big one, the one that stops most people dead in their tracks? Social media. Now, for most people, putting yourself out there on social media is a pretty daunting journey. Instead of showing yourself off to your immediate circle, you're now exposing yourself to potentially hundreds, thousands, or even millions of strangers that have the capacity to be the worst versions of themselves due to their online anonymity. Bam, got that word right. It sucks when you've put years into your craft, dedicated countless hours learning how to film, script, edit, craft thumbnails and descriptions, only to have someone who doesn't know you to leave a mean-spirited comment and then give you a dislike. Moments like this give you a deep feeling of negativity towards the whole process. And if you haven't figured it out by now, this is meant to be a reflection on how I feel some days regarding this channel. It's tough trying to put out quality content while working a full-time job and trying to please everyone in real life and while trying to remain an active and loving father and husband. And every time a video flops or I receive a negative comment, it cuts a little deeper than I'd care to admit. It's kind of funny when I think about it. Like, I work, trade, and teach as a military service member where the results of my actions, the decisions that I make, they can have serious negative consequences. But despite all that, working on this channel and posting videos, that gives me like more anxiety than anything the military has thrown at me in recent memory. You know, this is the current journey that I'm on. I'm working on getting over my imposter syndrome regarding this channel. Now, most people in my niche, they have advanced degrees and they read dozens of books per year surrounding their area of expertise. But I'm not like them, and I have to accept that fact. The world doesn't need another Ali Abdaal, Matt D'Avella, or Thomas Frank. I have my own experiences that are unique to me. This will be the focal point around how I intend to get my imposter syndrome out of my head while going down my YouTube journey. I can't be an imposter if I'm bringing my own experiences to the table. Those experiences are mine and can't be replicated. And the same is true for you. If you want to put yourself out there, then you have to ask yourself, what's stopping you? This doesn't just apply to YouTube or social media in general. This could apply to anything, your family, your job, or real life social life. There is something great about you and your experiences. Those things make you unique. Figure out what that something is and keep that in mind constantly when you're wanting to express your thoughts, but you're afraid to because you feel like an imposter. Chances are that fear that's holding you back, it's actually more powerful in the minds of those that you're presenting to. More than likely, they too have their own insecurities regarding imposter syndrome and can't bring themselves to put their thoughts out there to a broader online audience. Keep this in mind when you're worried about what others think. It's a lot easier for others to speak negatively against you when they're sitting behind a computer, or they can hide behind the security of a group that they're familiar with. But when it really comes down to it, those same people couldn't step up and do what you just did. The fear is going to overtake them just like how it almost did for you. All right, so if it hasn't been made clear by now, I am a naturally insecure person. But over time, I've learned to work through it, and you can too. Figure out what you want to do, then poke all the holes you can in your plan. By doing this, you identify internally where you fall short, and this is going to give you all the homework you need to address those issues. But keep in mind, even if you figure out all the answers, that may not be enough. Applying your own thoughts and experiences to those answers is what takes you from feeling like an imposter to becoming someone who has truly valuable information to teach. Now, as always, guys, you know I truly appreciate each and every one of y'all for taking time to watch one of my videos. You know I've got more coming. Y'all take it easy.